Hi guys, this is Mr. San, your bio coach. Now let's look at what we are going to do in this video. We are going to look at root pressure. Okay, root pressure, a process of how the plants are bringing the water and mineral salts from the soil up to the xylem vessel. That process is called as the root pressure process. Now this is chapter 4, especially if you look at chapter 4.2, unit 4.2, you will be learning transport of water and mineral salts. Under that you got three important components, which is root pressure, transpirational pool and capillary action. Now I know many students are having problem with root pressure. Transpirational pool and capillary action is something that you guys have already done in PT3. Now root pressure is something which is very new for you. Now when we look at root pressure, we have to understand the structure of the root first. So I'm going to bring you back to chapter 3.2, which is the structure of the root. We need to understand the internal structure of the root. How and what are the components that makes the root structure. Now we're going to focus on a eudicot plant. Let's look at it. I'm just going to draw it over here. Okay. I'm going to do some drawing here. Okay, let's look at the structure of the root. Now, I'm going to use different colors to indicate different types of tissues that makes up the structure of the root. Yeah. Now, the outermost structure is known as the epidermis. Okay, the epidermal layer. Okay, of the root. That is the outermost structure, outermost tissue, which is protecting the internal tissue of the roots. Now the root structure also have root hairs. Okay, I'm going to draw some root hairs here. Alright, these are the root hairs. Okay, why do we have the root hairs? Root hairs is basically to increase the surface area to the volume ratio. So you got more and more of these water and mineral salts diffusing into the structure of the root. Okay, it is basically to increase the surface area to the volume ratio. If you look at the structure of the root hairs, also they are made up of epidermis tissue. Okay, so the blue color is all epidermis tissue. Epidermis tissue is a type of, it's made up of parenchyma cells. Okay, it is made up of parenchyma cells. Now please remember that. Parenchyma cells, they have a very thin cell wall. This is mainly for them to have easy diffusion of these water and mineral salts through the cells. Now if you look at this structure here, this is the epidermis structure. After the epidermis structure, we got another layer of cell. Okay, another layer of tissue, and this layer of tissue is known as the cortex tissue. Now if you look at cortex tissue is also made up of parenchyma cells. Okay, they are also made up of parenchyma cells. This is the cortex tissue here. Alright, this is the cortex tissue. Okay, it is also made up of parenchyma cells, but they are loosely arranged. Okay, they are loosely arranged. Why they are loosely arranged is because they have to have some gases exchange going on. Remember, the root hair structures, the root structure, not only the root hair cells, the epidermal cells, the cortex cells and all the other cells that we can find within the roots, they are highly condensed with a high number of mitochondrion. Okay, they have a lot of mitochondrion. They have high density of mitochondrion in each and every cell. The reason is because they want to generate energy in the form of ATP, and if they want to do the production of energy in the form of ATP, they will need to conduct cellular respiration, and so they will need to have a lot of oxygen gas. So gases exchange is quite very important in cortex tissue. So that is why they have these air pockets in between each and every cell. So they are loosely arranged. Remember that they are made up of parenchyma cells as well. So the blue color is epidermal. Then after that you have the cortex, and after the cortex, what do we have? After the cortex, we got another layer. Okay, we got another layer. Let me give another color for this. Okay, we got another layer. Now this layer is known as the endodermis. Okay, the green color is endodermis. All right, the green color is endodermis. All right, this layer of tissue, it's basically the cell wall of it is thickened with lignin and suberin. Endodermis has a strip which is known as the cell wall of the endodermis has a special strip. We call that as Casparian strip, which makes the cell wall of the endodermis impermeable to water. Remember all these facts that I'm telling you right now. Okay, endodermis is a structure, it's a tissue that the cell wall of it is thickened with lignin and suberin. They have strips. The cell wall of these endodermis tissues, they have these strips which is known as the Casparian strips, which makes it impermeable to water. Okay, they are not permeable to water, so please remember that. So this is endodermis. So you look at the layers that we have. The first layer, the blue color, is known as the epidermis. Then we have this one here is known as the cortex. And then we got this which is known as the endodermis. After the endodermis, what do we have? After the endodermis, we got another layer of tissue. Okay, we got another layer of tissue. Now this tissue is known as the pericycle. Okay, this tissue is known as the pericycle. Okay, let me draw that first. Okay, this tissue is known as the pericycle. Okay, pericycle is part of the vascular structure. Okay, all right, it is part of the vascular structure. Okay, so it is part of the vascular structure, and also it is involved in the secondary growth. Okay, the secondary growth of the vascular structure. Okay, so this is pericycle. All right, this is pericycle, and after the pericycle we have the vascular bundles, which we have the xylem. Okay, I'm going to give the black color for xylem. All right, okay, this is the xylem. Xylem is in the middle. Okay, that's the xylem vessel. Okay, that's the xylem vessel here. The middle one is the xylem vessel, and after that we have around that we have the phloem. Okay, we got the phloem. All right, let me draw the phloem for you. Okay, so you got phloem around that. Okay, so usually if you look at it, it looks like a star. Okay, it looks like a shape of a star, but here it doesn't really look like a shape of a star. But you need to know the arrangement of all these structures first in order for you to understand root pressure. So if you look at the structure here, the blue color here is epidermis, and then after that you got the cortex, and then you got the endodermis, followed by the pericycle, and then finally you have the xylem. Around the xylem you got the phloem. But in root pressure you don't involve phloem. Okay, although phloem is the one that is providing organic substances like sucrose to all these parts of the tissue, and which they are able to produce energy in the form of ATP, and they are using that energy in the form of ATP to conduct active transport. Okay, now let's look at root pressure now. Understanding the structure of internal structure of a root, the cross section of a root, is very important for you to understand root pressure. Without you understanding that, you will be having trouble understanding root pressure. Now let's look at root pressure now. Now when you talk about root pressure is a very interesting process. Okay, it is a very interesting process. Let's look at it. It's a process of how these roots of a plant are taking water and mineral salts from the soil and how they bring it to the xylem vessel. So first of all, you need to know the arrangement of the tissue. As I told you guys earlier, just now I showed you guys the cross section of the internal part of the root. Now we are now looking at the longitudinal section of the root structure. So it starts from the epidermis, and then after that we have the cortex. After the cortex we got the endodermis, and after the endodermis we got the pericycle, and finally we have the xylem vessel. Okay, so this is the flow of the water and mineral salts from the soil to the xylem vessel. Now what happens first? First, these epidermis cells will conduct active transport. You see, they are conducting active transport. They conduct this active transport. They use this energy in the form of ATP, and they will conduct active transport, pumping in mineral salts and ions. okay, they will pump in mineral salts and ion. They will keep on pumping mineral salts and ion against the concentration gradient. You know how active transport works. Okay, so these epidermal cells will pump in mineral salts and ions from the soil into the epidermis cells against the concentration gradient and making epidermis always low in water potential. Now remember that. Okay, they keep these cells always low. They are low in water potential. Okay, they are low in water potential. When you have low, this area, this tissue here, low in water potential, what happens that after that you got this water will start diffusing into the epidermal cells. Okay, water will start to diffuse into the epidermal cells via osmosis process. So now you got the mineral salts and ions in the epidermis, and also water started moving into the epidermal cells via osmosis process. So this is the concept here, and the same concept will be followed by all the other tissues. Now what happens after that? Now cortex will be doing active transport. They will be pumping in mineral salts and ions from the epidermal tissue into the cortex via active transport against the concentration gradient. So that is going to cause this cortex to be always low in water potential, and that is making the water from the epidermis tissue to diffuse into the cortex via osmosis process. Now remember, now you need to know something very important. Water started moving through one type of tissue to another type of tissue. There are two pathways that the water can take in order for them to move from one tissue to another tissue. The first pathway is known as the Simplast pathway. Simplast pathway, water diffuses from one tissue to another tissue through the cytoplasm. Okay, from one cytoplasm of the cell, it goes to another cytoplasm of the cell, and they will use this structure which is known as the Plasmodesmata. Okay, they will use the structure which is known as Plasmodesmata, and they will move from one cytoplasma to another cytoplasma of the cell. Now this pathway is known as the Simplast pathway. It is known as the Simplast pathway. When one cell, okay, water move from one cell to another cell through the structure which is known as Plasmodesmata, from one cytoplasma to another cytoplasma, it is known as the Simplast pathway. The other pathway that we need to understand is about the Apoplus pathway. The Apoplus pathway is that the water diffuses from one cell to another cell using the cell wall. They will pass through the cell wall, because you see cell walls are made up of cellulose fibers and they are randomly arranged, and so they have a lot of pores, and which allows this water to diffuse along the cell wall structure. So this is Apoplus pathway. So water can move from one cell to another cell using Simplast pathway and Apoplus pathway. So that is one thing that you guys will need to remember, very important. They can ask you in paper 1 and even in paper 2 in section A. Okay, now let's look at the next one. The next one, how does the water and mineral salts goes from cortex to endodermis? Same way, same thing. That the endodermis will start to do active transport. They will pump in mineral salts and ion against the concentration gradient, making endodermis. This is endodermis. Endodermis will conduct active transport, and they will pump in mineral salts and ion against the concentration gradient until they make this place low in water potential. Endodermis now will be low in water potential, and that is going to cause the water to diffuse into the endodermis from the cortex via osmosis process. But here you need to understand something. Earlier I told you that the endodermis has something called the Casparian strips. Alright, the Casparian strips making the endodermis impermeable to water. So there is no way for water to move via Apoplus pathway, because Apoplus Pathway is a pathway of water moves through the cell wall from one tissue to another tissue. But when the plant has the endodermis tissue has the Casparian strips, it does not allow the water to pass through the endodermis Casparian strip, because Casparian strips are impermeable to water. So water can only diffuse from the cortex into the endodermis via Apoplus pathway alone. So they will go through the Plasmodesmata and goes from cortex cytoplasm to endodermis cytoplasm. Now the same process is done by the pericycle. Pericycle will conduct active transport, pumping in mineral salts and ion from the endodermis, making the pericycle always hypertonic or low in water potential, and they will pump the mineral salts and ion against the concentration gradient, making the pericycle always low in water potential, and that is going to cause water to diffuse from the endodermis to the pericycle via osmosis process. And finally, the final thing happens, which is pericycle helps to pump in, because xylem doesn't have mitochondria. It does not have mitochondria. So pericycle helps to pump in mineral salts and ions into the xylem vessel against the concentration gradient, and making xylem always low in water potential. Okay, they make it xylem always low in water potential, and so water from the pericycle can diffuse into the xylem vessel via osmosis process. So once you have xylem vessel filled up with water, then xylem vessels, which is a narrowed vessel, elongated end to end, and it is a continuous tube for xylem vessel. Okay, if you look at xylem vessel, they are continuous tube, elongated end to end. They are very narrow, and that is going to cause capillary action to take place. There is adhesive force and cohesion force causing capillary action, and because of transpirational pool, okay, we got something called transpiration pool. Okay, that when daytime stomata opens and water evaporates out through the leaves, the stomata of the leaves, which is going to cause the water to be brought from the root to the shoot of the plant and supply water to all the parts of the plant, especially to the mesophyll cells, the palisade mesophyll cells and spongy mesophyll cells, because they are actively conducting photosynthesis process. So this is root pressure, guys. It's a very simple process, as you guys can see. You guys just have to remember that one cell will be doing active transport to make it low in water potential, and so osmosis can take place. So these cells, these tissues are highly condensed with high number of mitochondria in order for them to generate energy in the form of ATP. So what you guys have to know, the structure of the root. Okay, please make sure you know the structure of the root, the internal structure of the root, and then if you study root pressure, it will be much more better and easier. If you want my notes, join my lesson. I'm Mr. Sun, your bio coach. I'll see you guys in the next topic. Bye bye.